Okay, everybody. Here we go. I think I'm on.
You're on.
I'm on. I don't know if we'll have any folks today. We've been having some good crowds. Somehow, by the end of a lot of people watch it ultimately, but I'm not sure if they will today. We have some people on already, maybe just you. Okay.
Hello, Max. It's Steve.
Hi, Steve. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for. I know you have You might as well just stay on the phone. You were on last night. You're going to be on later today for the discernment committee meeting, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a day of conference calling.
And that was actually my first Zoom meeting ever.
Oh, really? Oh, you did well with it then. Yeah, I've had a couple of Zoom meetings. We had a Zoom stewardship meeting. Lucy's on the phone also. Connie had a fall. I found out after we got off the phone yesterday, Steve. So Connie won't. She's okay, but she fell on her face carrying some plants out at Bartlett Farm. So.
Oh.
And those that are on Facebook, welcome. I don't know if anyone's on yet. So yeah, so I don't know if you saw our posting. We're having the Acts 2, 42 through 47. And Lucy's going to read that for us. We're going to have the 23rd Psalm, the King James Version of the 23rd Psalm. And then the first letter of Peter 2, 19 through 25, which I won't preach about this week, but you'll see why. And then John 10, 1 through 10. Usually we don't use, because we're having morning prayer still, we usually have one of the lesson, a psalm, and the gospel. The psalm first, and then a lesson, either an epistle or from Acts of the Apostles, and then the gospel. So we'll get started with this. And so welcome everyone. Thank you again for all your prayers of support for Ollie. She's doing so much better and sleeping so well now, and her oxygen level is right now that she's firing on all cylinders in her heart. So the girl with the golden heart has made a dramatic comeback. So thank you for your prayers during these anxious times.
She looks so much better.
I know, doesn't she? She's been on. Poor Ollie. We have a long day because we have prayers from the attic at 8:30 at night, which we love doing. But also, of course, it's we have to stay awake. And I'm a night owl, but Ollie's not so much. Ollie, remember when that movie Dancing with Wolves came out? It's not. This isn't really politically correct, so sorry in advance. It's not a good way to start a comment. But we all decided we should have Native American names too. They named him Dancing with Wolves because he would go out and I'd look like he was scaring the wolves away. Maybe they thought he was dancing. The Native people did. So Ollie's nickname was, her Indian name, Native American name was, goes upstairs and lies down, because she would say, Steve, you and Joey, Lucy, just you guys stay and talk to Max. I'm gonna go upstairs and lie down. And she'd be back in 5 minutes, but of course she would not be. She'd be up there till 7 in the morning. So so that was her name. Goes upstairs and lies down. Poor Ollie. Tell too many stories about her. Beverly, welcome from Matticat. And it's a blustery day. I've had my French doors open here in my conference room, but then it's the wind's picked up, hasn't it? It's really blustery now. It's so windy. Is the ferry running? Do we know, Lucy? When I see the wind,
I have not gotten a text that it's not running.
It's like a wind tunnel here, so maybe it's just it's really it's blowing around the church and the offices. But okay, everyone. So then we're having. We'll get started. Lucy is offered to pray to read our first lesson, and then maybe Steve, you want to prepare 1 Peter 2, 19 through 25 if you'd like to read. And I think we have pretty good sound, right? I know Beverly's on the phone too. I think we have pretty good sound with our conference call machine here when there's not too many people on. So it's so good to everyone join us. Okay, so Lucy,
Go ahead.
Acts of the Apostles, go ahead, please. It's chapter 2, 42 through 47, those that are out in TV land.
And I am reading from the Oxford Annotated Bible, Revised Standard Version. Okay, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done through the apostles. And all who believed were together, and had all things in common. And they sold their possessions and goods, and distributed them to all, as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they partook of food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.
Great, so thank you. So, yeah. So, Acts of the Apostles, again. Now, Steve's on our stewardship committee. Steve Kelly's on the line from. This would be good for a stewardship campaign, don't you think? That people put all their possessions in common.
Just sell everything and give it to the church.
That's sell everything. That's right. And then you have no worries. You don't have to worry about your possessions anymore.
Right. Max will take care of it for you. Don't worry.
That's right. No oversight committee needed. No. And so, anyways, yeah. So this is a profile of the early church. You can see where, Luke, of course, the person who wrote the Gospel of Luke also wrote Acts. They can tell by the style. It's like just a continuation, really, of the Gospel. Again, not just a history, though it's more of a history than much of the Bible, of the history of the early church, but also does a theological bent and has those reasons why these lessons were given. And some of these reasons, I think, with this lesson were that many of the people that the writer of Luke knew were Christians. A lot of them were of considerable means, and so by joining with this other band of Christians, the band rather, it was considered like a group of outcasts. You would actually become yourself less popular, less cherished in the community. You'd lose some of your prestige, and so it was sacrificial for people of means, because again they'd put it together to meet the needs, as we do, through our almsgiving, our stewardship, our pledging, plate offerings, the way that many of you support all kinds of ministries, as Ollie and I do over the years, things that we've been involved with and continue to support. And so it takes some of that, doesn't it? Take some of that sharing of and generosity of spirit to make it all happen. And so this talks about. This is kind of speaking words of comfort to that community. I see this as part of that. Acts. Any insights from anybody on the phone? Again, if people want to dial in and make comments or read, I should post those numbers more often. It's 1-605-313-4820. And then 268-007 is the code, followed by the pound sign. So if you ever want to call in, I'll post those numbers next week so people can call in and comment. So anything about that?
How about verse 43? It's just sort of interesting. In the text that I have, which is the New Revised Standard, it says, "Awe came upon everyone," instead of fear. So I grabbed my Greek New Testament, and it did use the word phobos, fear. Just sort of interesting.
Is it so? It uses the word fear in the original Greek.
Yeah, phobos, like our word phobia, and I guess it's like people say that whenever angels appear, the first thing they have to say is, "Don't be afraid."
Yes, don't be afraid.
And so maybe sometimes seeing signs and wonders is can be a little upsetting. It's certainly not in one's daily routine.
Yes, very much so. And I always see, so often the Psalms talk about fear of the Lord. Maybe in fear and awe, I guess maybe go hand in hand. Like you said, the initial response is maybe fearful. It's like, wow, this is something unknown, something shocking. And then you see it more fully as a revelation.
What do you tell people when they ask you about that phrase, the fear of the Lord?
Again, because with my understanding is the word is really, it should be awe, fear of the Lord.
Yeah.
What Christ revealed is not that God is a fearsome God, right? But merciful,
Exactly.
Merciful judge, like none that we've ever encountered in traffic court or any other part of our lives. And and so I think awe is much. And again, I've always when we talk to Sister Suzanne on our staff and my church down in Delaware, I would talk to our Sunday school people and youth ministers, that our goal was not to push a catechism on our young people or make them memorize things like that. Certainly it's good to know the creed and from an early age the Lord's Prayer, some basic prayers that we share in common. But it was to instill us, how I've always put it, a spiritual imagination, a sense of awe. That's why I'm a follower of Christ, and that's why I'm a priest. Is I had that sense of awe at worship, especially. That's what I remember feeling at first. In worship as a young boy, with the rest of the congregation, rest of the parish, I had that sense of awe. And of course, the incense didn't hurt. And it was all the senses. I remember walking into church and vividly, of course, you could smell the candles. Before there would. When we had no incense, just the candles burning was a smell that was familiar to me in church. I like using all the senses. It's hard now with because of people's allergies, of course, but that's why when we're locked down, we brought incense in a couple of times, and like we're St. Thomas, his church in Manhattan.
Oh yeah,
clouds of incense. But yeah, so I think. Again, fear and awe, kind of the initial stage seems to be fear, but it's that sense of awe of God that.
It's a much better translation.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we often turn to Steve, those that are new to our Bible study, because he had a very practical major at school. He was a classics major, and so that again, if I I could have really been somebody. I could have had a church on Nantucket or something if I had studied classics. I thank God that we studied Latin and at least Greek roots in our grammar school days, and some Greek in seminary, but not nearly enough. Yeah, my book. Sometimes I read this. I have this Harper's Bible commentary from upstairs, and it just calls this one of the profiles of the early church that does something that distinguished the early church, that the members of the community held things in common. And of course there was not, we can be critical of the 1% or whatever, and a lot of wealth seems to be concentrated at the top. It was always that way in the ancient world, that, and much more so that, the 1% are the ones that at least had meat and, things, and then the rest were peasants that lived on a very small amount of bread and water, what they could scrape together, It's kind of what we see from the history, not from the Bible as much as other history books of the ancient world.
And yet it's an interesting point to raise, though, that people that formulated the 39 Articles were so conscious of this passage that one of the 39 Articles is that Christian men's goods are not held in common.
Yeah, that's right. A disclaimer. Yeah.
Right.
39 Articles, everyone, is in the back. It's one of the historical documents in the back of our Book of Common Prayer, which is an interesting section, those historical documents. Worth looking at. Thank you. Okay, good. So, 23rd Psalm is fabulous psalm, of course. And for this one, our verger, Curtis Barnes, had the right idea. is to use the King James version of it, because that's the one we have a very similar translation in our Psalter, our collection of Psalms in the Book of Common Prayer. But on page 476, it's in a burial service, and it's I think our Rite One burial service, yes. And it's at the bottom of page 476 in the prayer book. And those that you know this one by heart even. And I think this is one who Connie's not on the phone today. She'll be back next week. She's doing very well. Because she leads us in the psalm. But I think this is one we want to pray together in unison, because it's to chop it up it would be a disconnect. Because you'll again, I have so many loved ones over the years, through my parish ministries, parishioners, family through the parish that have developed dementia, but they could remember the 23rd Psalm and the Lord's Prayer long after they could not remember names. It was that much part of their upbringing and something centering in their lives. So it would bring people comfort that they could pray those words with me. They just pop out and bring a lot of people great joy that they'd hold on to that memory. So let's pray together the 23rd Psalm, the King James Version. The Lord is my shepherd.
The Lord is my shepherd.
I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What a powerful psalm, huh? So much wonderful imagery. It was chosen again for this Sunday. It seemed like we had it a couple of months ago too in the lectionary on Sunday. It's for because there's a shepherd image in the gospel. You'll see Jesus is going to talk about the sheepfold and the gate, and so which leads into the I'm a good shepherd lines in the Gospel of John. So that's what. And this is of course a beautiful King David being a shepherd boy himself when called to be king, designated to be king. This is attributed to King David. Lord is my shepherd. So it's a beautiful, again, just like Jesus says so often in my ministry over the years, less so now during challenging times when people are turning more to their spiritual center, turning more to God, that people seem like sheep without a shepherd. Right? Maybe you've sensed that too, that there's so often I've met people of all ages that without the direction or the purpose that they could have in their lives, by just having not everyone has to follow our shepherd, I don't believe that, to be saved, but whatever the understanding of where they receive their spiritual strength, that there's been a great disconnect. And so just like Jesus sensed that people were like sheep without a shepherd, he had the compassion on them. I see that out there in the world. And again, churches have done a lot over the years to drive people away. And so it's not all, there's no blame. People don't need church to be saved. I never think that. But again, people just seem like the boating term would be without a rudder, I guess, right? Rudderless. We know that if you've ever been in a boat I've been in a boat where the rudder broke. You feel like you're gonna go down into, you're gonna be sucked down the drain or something, in a whirlwind. Yeah, but anyways. Yeah, so every line is it's a beautiful meditation, isn't it? The psalm. I could just preach on this.
So amazing.
Right. And beautiful images of green pastures. Ali and I have, over the years, we started going to, outdoor art festivals, things like that, and would purchase a little art. And so we have some art in the rectory. And so many of them seem like this image of lying down in green pastures. There's a lot of idyllic scenes with a little sweet little river going through, or a lot of landscapes and seascapes, but a lot of green pasture images, heavenly kind of images, right? The still waters, not...
Comment on the very beginning of the psalm?
Pardon me?
Could I comment on the first
Please.
lines of the psalm?
Yes.
The very famous words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And I remember as a kid when I first heard this, I didn't understand it because it's Jacobean English, and it was only later when I saw the alternative modern translation, "The Lord is my shepherd, therefore can I lack nothing," that I understood it. Because in modern English, it sounds like, I remember asking, what does that mean? Because it's, "The Lord is my shepherd, whom I shall not want."
Yeah, it seemed like.
And I don't need him. And what? That doesn't make sense. So I was just making a comment on, I love the King James Bible and its beautiful words as much as the next guy. But sometimes you have to modernize it to get it to make sense.
I think very much so, Steve. The same with me. I studied Shakespeare and took a couple semesters of Shakespeare in school. I wasn't a Shakespeare scholar. I was blessed to be invited back for the second semester at least. And such a wonderful class that was. Dr. Smith I can't remember his first name. But anyways, but the King James Version is almost like Shakespearean English, which is hard to understand unless you studied enough to get the connotations. And I see our regular prayer book Psalter says, "I shall not be in want." So that's a little bit more to it. But I like your translation. When I go on vacation on Block Island, our friend Barbara has a book, and it's the Bible in everyday English, which I wouldn't want to use for liturgy. But I look at it when I'm out there because it's helpful for things like this. It puts it in, again, it's not street language or anything, but it's told in a narrative that you would use if you were just telling a story in a group. And I can't think of the name of it. People out there probably know it. I'll research it and get back to you with what it might be called. It came out a while ago, probably 20 years ago.
Is it the Good News Bible?
No, but the Good News Bible, which is very simple English. For my internship before seminary, I spent a year in a parish, Milltown Parish in Rhode Island, and they used that version, and it worked well for them. It was, they're humble people, and that's a fairly humble. The Good News Bible is used in some of our churches. Most Episcopal churches use the New Revised Standard Version, which came out in 1989 from the World Council of Churches. I know we had some folks down in Delaware that would ask us to read the King James Version during Christmas. The stories of the birth of Jesus, and those words that we all heard, growing up.
That's how we know it.
Yeah, which is powerful too. But again, there's been so much research. Some of the churches out here, I know we had a church in Delaware they split from the Episcopal Church. They had an Anglican church, they called it, and it was based on the 1928 prayer book and the King James Version of the Bible. That's what it was all. It was all that. They were I know some friends of mine went there who had been divorced and remarried, and the one of the announcements about communion was, "Don't come to communion if you've been divorced and remarried." It's like, wow. I think there were about 8 people at church that morning, and they never went back, but they felt judged, kind of, So, anyways, it's there's been so much archaeological research that it's good to have more than one version of the Bible, but certainly we don't want to think that that's the way God spoke was in the King James language. Of course, my dad, as I always say, I'm very comfortable with our Rite One language at church, which is more traditional language for those that aren't usual churchgoers that might be listening in. Because my dad would say, we shall go to the beach. He was an old-fashioned Boston guy from Roxbury and Hyde Park section of Boston. Roslindale, and then Hyde Park. So we shall go to the beach. We're having Rite One this week. Maybe I mentioned at Prayers from the Attic. We were asked to, if we would include Rite one of these Sundays. I said, yeah, we'll do that this Sunday. Often we include it in the winter. We'll have Rite One Eucharist during normal times, once a month or so, which confuses people because when I say the Lord be with you, people still say, and also with you, except a lot of people in my Bible study will say, with thy spirit. I know last week I think we ended that way.
That's what they say in St. Thomas. They say the with thy spirit.
With thy spirit, the Rite One version, yeah.
Yeah. I once was in a class at St. Bartholomew's, and a young priest was talking about the different versions of the Bible, and then he got kind of funny and sarcastic, and he said, well, of course we revere the King James Bible, which is the very text that Jesus carried with him as he walked on the shores of the Sea of Galilee.
Oh, that's great. You hear that, everyone? That Jesus carried the text of the King James Version with him when he was walking on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. I love that. That's perfect. Okay, and then I think those that heard me preach on Sunday at church last time we had this, a couple of months ago, you heard me when I traveled with the Bishop of Pennsylvania. I was a canon missioner there for youth, children and youth. And for a while he was, often the bishops, they'll use the same sermon for 6 months or so. I don't want to, no offense to bishops out there, but, because whatever the gospel is, they're going to have a message for you. And for some reason, I saw this one several times. And you heard me tell the story. He has his bishops, his shepherd's crozier, I guess it is, right? Crozier? And his hook, is his staff, shepherd's staff. Oh, I love that it says, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Right? That the discipline of God is a comfort to us. It doesn't box us in. I have to say, as a boy in the denomination I grew up in, I felt kind of boxed in by the rules, but that the discipline of God, our spiritual discipline, is a comfort. And so, anyways, the bishop would bring children up onto the altar. Maybe stop me. I'll be like my mother. If you heard this story, stop me. My mother will always say. But of course, we let her go on. And so he would bring the children up. Often these are stone steps or marble steps up in the chancel. And so he'd be preaching up there. And so he'd push the children forward, like to the edge of a precipice, to the edge of the stairs, with the blunt end, the rod of his staff. And then with the hooked end, he'd pull them back by the neck or shoulder from the edge. And so he talked about how a shepherd would do that. A shepherd would prod the sheep along, but then pull them back from the precipice with the hook end. And so I thought it was just that we were going to get sued by the families for putting the poor children through this demonstration. But the rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And so, but anyways, that image always sticks with my mind when I see this. And then isn't it so that, one of the messages you'll see in the gospel is that I've come that you might have life and might have it more abundantly. I think that's at the end of this gospel. And maybe not, because I'm reading that. Oh, yeah, it is. I can't remember. So Jesus is saying that Jesus has come that we might have life and have it abundantly. And that always comes to mind when I see this, my cup runneth over. My cup runneth over. Okay, so that's the 23rd Psalm. We could go on. Why don't we, who wants to, Steve, do you want to read this first letter of Peter, chapter 2, 19 through 25 is our next reading, everybody.
1 Peter, and it's 2, 19 through 25.
19 25, yes.
I got it. Okay. A reading from the first letter of Peter. For it is a credit to you if, being aware of God, you endure pain while suffering unjustly. If you endure when you are beaten for doing wrong, what credit is that? But if you endure when you do right and suffer for it, you have God's approval. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When he was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that free from sin, we might live for righteousness by his wounds. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were going astray like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your soul. Here endeth the lesson.
Thanks be to God. Great, thanks, Steve. So yeah, so you can see why this was chosen in the lectionary. Again, just like the Psalm, because it's a shepherd reference coming up in the Gospel. That's one reason they included this lesson from 1 Peter. Of course, we've had the lessons of 1 Peter over the last weeks, and I thought those messages, last week was a good message. Let me see, there's one line in it that I used. It was about Philadelphia, right? The Greek word Philadelphia. I talked about it on Sunday's service. Mutual love. Yeah. So this one, but I didn't choose this reading for this week because, again, we have a psalm, a lesson, and then the gospel in morning prayer. And so I didn't have this one because of the suffering image. I don't know. The rest of the imagery is good. But for, if you endure when you're beaten for doing wrong, what credit is that? But if you endure when you do it right, so enduring beating isn't a great message. Suffering, that's a great message. Not such a great message here. So we know that Jesus suffered. We know somehow that through the wounds of Christ we are healed. That rings true for me. It's maybe weird sounding to people that aren't believers, not something logical. But somehow, and again, I don't believe that, that God sent his son to die for us. That's atonement. But that God came, we believe in the incarnation, that God came down in Jesus, not a separate being, came down in Jesus, was a victim of capital punishment of his day, and God did not let death be the end of the story, but rather the resurrection, and that we live in that resurrection. So suffering, we're not asked to suffer in this way. As a boy, too, because of our reverence for martyrs, and for people who suffered in their faith, that was held in high regard, and it is still in all denominations. We say the church was warded with the blood of the martyrs, right, as an old-fashioned expression. But also, you remember about this story too, classic story, when I was in a little village in Rhode Island as a curate, my second position out of seminary, St. Paul's in Wickford. We had our clergy group. Remember when Frank Sinatra died, we had our little clergy luncheon or meeting, and remember the Catholic priest said, I wouldn't want to be the priest for that funeral. I was like, well, Father, why is that? He said, because Frank was such a notorious sinner. He said, he was divorced and remarried, divorced, remarried, I don't know how many times. He hung around with people that maybe were notorious, had notorious reputations. And so we went around the table. It was so interesting again, you've heard this story 6 times probably already with my 2 years here. But around the table, everyone's, theological differences. And of course, when it came to me, I said, well, I believe that God is merciful and that God would be there to receive Frank Sinatra and would forgive his shortcomings. And then, but it was the American Baptist that I always quote. He had his heavy Rhode Island accent. An American Baptist, Roger Williams, the founder of Rhode Island, is a beautiful church at the bottom of College Hill. That other Ivy League school, Steve, the Brown University, at the bottom of the hill. Big, beautiful old white church. Roger Williams founded that congregation. And he founded Rhode Island to be a place of religious freedom. That you didn't have to be an Anglican or Church of England or any particular creed. You could be Jewish. Our first synagogue, Truro Synagogue, is in Newport. Newport, Rhode Island used to be the capital of Rhode Island. And again, the smallest state with the longest name. The state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations is the official name. And so yeah, where was I going with all that? Oh, so the American Baptist minister said, well, I tell them that there's no extra charge. Jesus paid the full price. There's no extra charge. And so I love that that Frank was saved through Christ, not by getting it right in his life.
That's wild.
Jesus paid the full price. There's no extra charge.
Extra charge? Oh my goodness.
So the slave image, often will, I think, we use a euphemism for slave, which would be servant, because again, some of the Bible was used to promote slavery in previous centuries, even. So, not a great word, but this Steve would tell us as a classics major that the word is. They didn't try to change this in New Revised Standard Version because we're considered. We don't earn our keep, but that we work on behalf of God as slaves, not expecting a reward. We already have a reward in knowing God's love, God's salvation. We're not earning our salvation. We're not getting wages. But that the original language was slaves that would be completely dedicated in our lives, servants of God, slaves. So yeah, but we don't. The only authority that our master is God, not worldly masters. So for you were going astray like sheep, but now you've returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls. Love that. Isn't that sweet? Nice image too of God, of God as our guardian. During anxious times for many, anyways. That. We don't just have a guardian angel, that God is our guardian. So again, I'm not going to be including this one on Sunday, but an interesting passage nonetheless. And they think that the first letter of Peter probably was his pseudonym. If it was a follower of Peter, lessons that they'd learned from Peter in that tradition of Peter, but written in the last decade of the first century. Is what is seen. Okay, good. So here's the gospel. Don't think we have Father Joe on today, do we? He's often there to read our gospel. Of course, morning prayer, lay people can read gospels too, but I guess I'll read this one.
Which one are we on now?
Oh, now we're going to go to the gospel, which is John 10, 1 through 10.
Okay.
And so I sent out a photo we have a kind of a severe-looking Jesus. I sent it out on Facebook. I should send the things I sent on Facebook. I could send it an email to Steve and to others that are not on Facebook. But it's just kind of, it's Jesus holding a lamb, but it's a funny kind of stern I'll send it to you afterwards, Steve. It's kind of a stern image. But here's a nice, here's a passage. It's John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. And then for morning prayer, we just usually introduce it reading from the Gospel of John. Jesus said, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is a shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." And Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that you may have life, and have it abundantly." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So the next, again, the following line in 11, Jesus says, "I'm the good shepherd." But this is not the good shepherd gospel. This is the gate.
Max, we were talking earlier about the business of the fear of God, and I sometimes talk with people who've gone away from Christianity because they had a bad impression of it early on, of a punishing, fearsome God.
Yes.
And I sometimes use this last line of our passage to change their mind if I can. I say, don't you remember Jesus said, "I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly."
That's right. Not being boxed in or have lesser life, or it's a very good line to quote. Yeah. And no, again, a lot of people have, and you can see some of the things in the news even. They'll quote some pastor that thinks that 9/11 happened on purpose by God, to punish whatever people. I mean, it's just horrible, the things that people put on God. But yeah, this is a wonderful. Now, I always had issues, Steve, with the gate, because I like the expression, which I can't find. I should look in my other translations, to make no irksome restrictions, and so not to restrict people's access to God has always been a goal of my ministry, and thank God I'm in the Episcopal Church, so we have open table. We openly baptize people. We don't make you be a member. Or I saw some church, there was a couple that wanted to get married in the middle of this shutdown, and some of the things from this, it was kind of a fancy church, which I won't identify, but I was like, talking about irksome restrictions, it's like, unless you've been a noticeable contributor. I forget what words they use for the last 2 years. Things like this. It was really. So I love that we don't say things like that. We say, yeah, if you want to be baptized, where's the water? Come on in. And so the gate image. I always said, for me, when I first would read this in the past, I would think that it was an obstruction, like it was a barrier, a gate in that way. But then, sometimes I used my, it's this book. It's by Bruce Malina, Malina, and Richard Rohrbaugh, Rohrbaughh, and it's from Fortress Press. It might be a little hard to find. It's from 1992, but it's a social science commentary of the synoptic gospels. And so synoptic gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not John. And so because Matthew and Luke leaned on some of the tradition from Mark that had written down already and tried to explain some things. I know when Martin Smith comes, that great preacher Martin Smith, an author, this is the one he often pulls off my shelf. I'll find him out on the porch in the morning reading this book. So it doesn't have this Gospel of John in there, but it has other images of the shepherd. And so when it talks about the sheepfold, it would be a wall, it'd be a wall with a gate. And the shepherd would bring, and different shepherds, often they had, it would be a common area. Like we have out in Nantucket here. Those that go out to Nantucket, you can see we still have pastures that are common areas so that people like Ollie and me who lived in town could have our sheep over there. We got a meatball over there watching them and have our sheep, just a couple blocks away on off of Pleasant Street and places like that. There's some pasture land still held in common by the town. And so the sheepfold would be a wall, earthen wall, a rock wall with a gate. And then the different shepherds would bring their sheep down in the evening from the hills for protection inside this compound, this open pen, or a closed pen. And then in the morning, the shepherd would let them out into the pasture. And so it's an image of protection, not a barrier, not of restrictions or,
Not punishment or confinement.
No punishment, that's right. No confinement, no elitism, nor separateness, but rather protection. So I love that. And again, if I hope if we have the Good Shepherd image next week for the gospel, it talks about the wolf coming. And, because my name's Wolf, the wolf always gets the bad rap, the wolf. And I know when Ollie and I, we had our first position out of seminary was in Tucson, Arizona, big, beautiful church, St. Philip's in the Hills, Spanish mission style, church, big glass window looking up into the mountains and the desert. And anyways, in the parish newsletter, the headline was, there are wolves at the door. There are wolves, actually. They didn't use the plural like the animal, but the wolves. The wolves are at the door because my wife Ollie Wolf and Max Wolf, with our 3 Jack Russell dog wolves, were at the door of the church. And so I'm glad that we don't have that image this Sunday. And no apologies for the poor wolves, the wolves. And but the gate, and so and I love that we know the voice of God, right? We know the voice of Christ, and I think that's worth listening for. You've heard me talk about again Martin Smith, some of his favorite images for preaching that I've cherished, and I've used it in my inquirers classes for confirmation and reception. Is that he has you put yourself in the gospel scene. Like in this one, we'd put ourselves in a pasture. We'd imagine the sheep. Don't have to use, even those of us city people and suburban people, we don't have to stretch too far to think of being in a situation in the ancient world where there's a sheepfold, an earthen or stone sheepfold. I think of Block Island is full of those stone farm walls where they would enclose the sheep. Mostly, of course, they would clear their fields so the sheep could eat. They could grow grass for the sheep to eat, but then also that would be enclosures for the sheep. So I envision that, and so Martin Smith always envisions. He says, envision Jesus coming towards you, and maybe this image of the sheepfold. You're standing out at the sheepfold, and that Jesus approaches you, and so in the middle of anxiety over health issues and some anxiety over the pandemic until it's more fully under control, that we would hear the words of Jesus saying, come being here with me tonight. Be safe with me here. Some welcoming and comforting words of Jesus. And one of the ones I love is, you've heard me talk about this in my Bible study, is he has the image of Jesus is coming to you to thank you for something. There's another Martin Smith meditation. So he said, get in a meditative state, turn off your cell phone for a minute or whatever, and just disconnect and just kind of let your imagination free. and envision Jesus coming towards you to thank you. And so listen for the words of Jesus, what Jesus might thank you for. If you do this in a prayerful state, give it a try. I think it'll be something that will be powerful in your life too. Another one is Jesus as a great physician. That Jesus is coming. You invite Jesus to sit down with you and to look at your spiritual health, most importantly, and maybe your physical and emotional health too. Invite Jesus to give you insights to that. And listen, you might actually hear, you might consider it an audio hallucination or just a divine message that would bubble up inside you and be something you could hear. So it might sound a little mystical coming from just this waspy parish priest, Episcopal priest. I'm not waspy, but not known to be a mystic, but I think that it's a mystical experience. So I love that we hear the voice of our shepherd. Again, we hear words that jump out at us from the different gospels of Jesus, and some of those words ring true for us more than others, like the ones that Steve quoted at the last verse here. Verse 10b, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. And then other translations say have it more abundantly. So words like that of Jesus that are precious to us. And listen to those voices. And of course now there's such a cacophony of voices in the world. I would say one of the challenges we have now in modern world is the din of sounds coming at us. Now it's a little bit more quiet now with things closed down somewhat. Won't stay that way, but the quiet's been sweet. I just hear, I missed the 12 o'clock ferry whistle, but with my door closed today. But sometimes those kind of the essential noises of the world are brought to the forefront. But I think also as modern people, we can kind of tune out, obviously we're selective in what we could hear. We don't want to be so selective that we wouldn't hear some of the needs around us, some of the messages. We want to fully hear the needs around us, so it can be a better comfort for people, help meet those needs. But to hear the messages from God, right, more fully. Yeah. So gatekeeper. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Again, I love, maybe I mentioned this in recent weeks, either Prayers from the Attic or here. I found a banner over down in the Altar Guild room, down in the undercroft of the church, a storage room for the Altar Guild. And it's a banner that the diocese had put out, pretty banner. And it was kind of a very sweet, light, kind of grapey purple background. And then they had a very interesting image for the Diocese of Massachusetts they developed. I think it was when Bishop Shaw was elected, some people helped him kind of with some imagery and messaging, I guess, because it was professionally done, it seemed. And so it was like a hand made the sign of the cross with paint. It looked like a child could have done it even, but streaks and a cross. You heard me say this, maybe it was just last week, but it said called. It's like called, nurtured, and sent. That we're called. That we're not just people of faith because our grandparents were or our parents. It wasn't just because of the schools we attended, or that we have listened for that voice. So even when we weren't listening, that voice came through and called us each by name, and we've responded and said yes. And I believe God is calling others too. We're not the special ones, but I guess we're the ones that have paid enough attention that we've responded and to that call, have been drawn by God's calling of us, and then blessedly been nurtured in our faith through the word and sacraments, through our fellowship, through our servanthood, being slaves for Christ, all of those things. and then that we're sent. And we're sent now in an odd way because we're sent while we're mostly confined. But again, our prayers are sent out. Our goodwill is reaching people in so many ways. There's been so many acts of kindness during this lockdown that it's overwhelming to me. I tell you, I was on a conference call the other day with Dr. Balea, my fabulous brain scientist friend, and when they talked about gratitude, the subject was from grief to gratitude. I mentioned in my prayers from the attic the other night. And so they asked for one word in connection to gratitude, and the word that came to me was overwhelming. That there was such it's a flood word, a torrent of an outpouring, a flood of goodwill towards Ollie and me and Meatball and the kiddies during these past weeks especially. And it reminded me of the blessing of so many kindnesses and people have been merciful and encouraging over so many years that it was overwhelming to me. It floods up in me, It's so there's so much to be grateful for, and that it's overwhelming. Remember, I love that image from.
I'm grateful for this class, Max.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much, Steve. Thank you. Again, to be able to have
now, but thank you so much.
To have loved ones like you that we only get to see for 6 weeks out of the year usually, or a couple of months, to be able to be connected in these ways over the rest of the year is a gift. And that's something that we're going to continue as when we open up more fully, is that we'll still be able to be more connected. And that, again, that's what I mentioned too. And the other night I mentioned at Prayers from the Attic that they asked me what I thought would come, the good that would come out of this. And ironically, it's the connectedness, that we've found ways to be more connected. We cherish our connection, I think, in stronger ways, our spiritual and emotional connections, intellectual connections, all of it. And that we're able to do that in this modern age in many different ways. And even on the phone with our friend Connie's not a computer person, but today she was not able to, but she'll be calling in regularly. That's just a gift. So our connectedness is...
Well, thank you. I have to go now.
Okay, me too. Thanks, thanks, Steve. And thanks for doing the reading. Give everyone in New York our love. Give Joey my love. Okay. And so everyone, I guess our time is drawing to a close. Oh, I was going to say that image from that funny movie, Kevin Spacek movie, American Beauty. An odd movie, but remember the neighbor who filmed things, and he filmed the bag just blowing in the wind, a plastic bag that blessedly we don't carry anymore in our stores, blowing around a circle in the wind, and leaves blowing around, a little whirlwind. And he said, sometimes the world is so beautiful that I can't stand it, I think, something like that, or my heart can't stand it. Something like that. My heart can't take it. Just overwhelmed. Like me, I'm overwhelmed by the gratitude. Sometimes the world is so beautiful that we're just so overwhelmed, right? Overwhelmed. Okay, and so I'm going to say a prayer to close out. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone. And tonight will be back up in Prayers from the Attic, of course, 8:30. Live, taped for later viewing. Like beautiful, peaceful service, I hope. We end with jazz, but it's peaceful. And yeah, so here's our prayer. Boy, this is one of my nightmares, is that I can't find my pages. It's because, look at, I have so many prayer cards. Yeah. Here's a prayer of thanksgiving. Accept, O Lord, our thanks and praise for all that you do for us. We thank you for the splendor of the whole creation, for the beauty of this world, for the wonder of life, and for the mystery of love. We thank you for the blessing of family and friends, and for the loving care which surrounds us on every side. We thank you for setting us at tasks which demand our best efforts, and for leading us to accomplishments which satisfy and delight us. We thank you also for those disappointments and failures that lead us to acknowledge our dependence on you alone, O God. And above all, we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, for the truth of his word and the example of his life, for his steadfast obedience, which overcame temptation, for his dying, which overcame death, for his rising to life again, which we are raised to the life of your kingdom. And grant us the gift of your Holy Spirit, that we may know Christ and make Christ known, and through him at all times and at all places may give thanks to you, O God, in all things. Amen. Amen. Okay, peace out. Thanks so much for joining, and we will we'll see you tonight, Prayers in the Attic, and then next week, of course. All right. Thanks so much. Bless you.